There was immense joy when a record goes to number one.
We knew every 5 days we had to churn out a hit.
It was only a matter of how do we make great pop music. Everything else was secondary to that.
As a team,
magic. It's always clever. It's always catchy. There was this smouldering genius taking place.
Over 100 top 40 hits in a period of 4 or 5 years. I mean, nobody does that.
It was classic pop. It was uncompromised. That's what the 80s were, you know. Stock Aitken Waterman defined it.
I always look for the magic. There's some magic operating in all hit songs.
It was fun. It was super exciting, but they were on a mission big time.
You were on the crest of a wave.
The harder you work, the luckier you get.
It's a lot to have one hit, but to have the whole of the top 10, I mean, that's just showing off, isn't it?
Most people treated pop music as trivial. It was more serious than life and death to us.
I knew the industry was out to screw us. Had to fight all along.
That it ended the way it did was tragic.
I stand accused of loving the first degree.
I probably had enough by that time, you know. Probably sick to death of each other.
I really do believe the three of them are geniuses. I think the records still sound as good today as they did 30, 35 years ago.
I'm just immensely proud that I'm part of that legacy. It was a pretty wild ride.
I was really interested from the age of about 7 in writing songs. You know, you start with a blank sheet of paper and you come up with something that can be popular and sold all over the world.
I got given a transistor radio. I think I was probably 8 or 9. It had an earplug with it. I'd go upstairs to bed and then in went the earpiece and on came Radio Luxembourg. That was when pop music started to become important to me.
I've got a really good eclectic record collection. So I started doing discos. It was a Saturday night and I was spotted by the local Mecca manager and he said, did I want a job at the Locarno?
I just got myself an electric piano, had an acoustic guitar and a very primitive drum machine. And so by the time I'm 10 or 11, I'm writing some songs and accompanying myself.
I had set myself a quest of being the greatest guitar player in the world. Mum, can I have a guitar? The answer to that was, you can have a guitar, but first you've got to learn to play the piano. So what that did teach me was proper technique, and it taught me theory.
I saw that Magnet Records were looking for promotion guys. Now, the last thing I wanted to do was I didn't want to be a promotion guy. And I thought, well, at least I'd get into the music industry.
My band did dinner music, we did weddings, bar mitzvahs, it didn't really matter. We would cater to most people. One particular evening, my guitarist let me down again. He'd fallen off stage drunk. And I was on the lookout, I needed another guitarist. I asked the girl singer or anybody, do they know anyone? And she said to me, well, I know Matt Aitken.
I got a phone call one Saturday night, can you do a dep with my band?
He was a great guitarist, you know.
And these were, well, you know, good paying gigs in the West End.
Whilst Matt would be playing with me in the band at the Hilton, etc., on other nights we would be in rock pubs doing songs that I'd already written, my own material. And Matt added a dimension to that, and he was clearly, you know, influencing what we were doing and how it was sounding.
He said to me one day, you know, if we keep relying on these gigs, we're not going to get the studio side of it away, the creative side.
I'm going into a studio that I built under my house, which Matt had been involved with, and I'm going to go into record production, break it into the wider music industry. Matt said, I'm coming with you, you know, I'm keen on doing that as well.
Got a call from a friend who I'd signed called Peter Collins, who really was a writer, producer, and I was getting nowhere at Magnet. So I sort of teamed up with Peter. We did Tracy Ullman for Stiff. Tracy Ullman was huge for us. Then we did Nick Kershaw and Matt Bianco. So we got an amazing little thing going. I mean, we're the biggest record in the world with Musical Youth, Pastor Duchy. But I wanted more. I wanted something different.
There was just so many brilliant influences going on around about that time in the 80s.
When I got really, became a pop addict in my early teens, I listened to a lot of British pop. Duran Duran, Adam and the Ants, so much of that kind of new wave music.
The New Orders, the Heaven 17s, the Thus, the Bowies, which was sort of unisex and quite alternative and credible.
Trevor Horn with Frankie and ABC, very processed drums. So really technology came into the pop world.
You had this massive mix of different musical styles all happening at the same time.
I got a call from a guy called Mike Stock. He said, could he come and see me? They came up with Matt and they played me this song. It was called The Upstroke.
I came into the studio one day and Mike said, God, you've had a good shave. And I said, oh, that's because I did the upstrokes. He said, oh, that's a great title. And so we just wrote this sort of gimmicky, boppy dance track.
There was something about the track that was like, whoa, this is different.
He let it go to the second chorus and then he stopped it.
I like it, but it's got to be more radical.
It sort of reached down under his desk and he pulled out a record and put it on the turntable and he played this, and it was the New York mix of Relax, Frankie Goes to Hollywood, and said, can you make this sound like this? And we said, yes. And he said, you sound very confident. And we said, we are.
So Pete therefore had sort of imagination that he agreed to book a studio, and that was the Marquee Studio in Wardour Street.
The first record they brought in was The Upstroke. This track's been recorded, we want it to sound like Frankie Goes to Hollywood.
Mike came up with a band's name, Agents on Aeroplanes.
That was a quote from John le Carré, the spy who came in from the cold.
We had some artwork done, like Frankie Goes to Hollywood. They probably spent $5 or $6 grand, we spent £3, I think. Because if you look at the sleeve, it's bloody awful. But it was evocative of the moment. The first person to play a stock Aitken Waterman record was the best DJ in Britain at the time, and that was John Peel. Now, John Peel at that time was the god of music. He thought it was great.
The track sounded a bit unusual. Certainly it was different from anything else that was going around.
And that was the start.
It was a progression, we were moving up.
We might have enough money to make another record, but we weren't making, any big money then.
Mike and I wrote the songs. Mike and I did the arrangement that became the single. Peter was our eyes and ears. Peter dealt with the business, dealt with finding new people for us to work with, and interfaced on our behalf with the outside world in the record companies.
We would go down to a pub called the Gladstone most nights at 10 o'clock when we finished.
It was that point where I said, OK, we've got to do this ourselves.
If we shared everything equally, production credits, writing credits, everything, we would therefore be a strong unit, and we shake our hands on that, which we did outside the pub. And from that moment, we were Stock Aitken and Waterman.
And Matt said, it sounds like a firm of solicitors. I said, I bloody hope so.
There was a point at the beginning of it all when we were following the trend and saying we need to make high-energy dance music here because there's a market.
The high-energy sort of disco, which was like underground club scene, which my mother was really big in. So she was having like a big hit with So Many Men, So Little Time. My auntie was also a disco diva. Amy Stewart, she'd had big hits with Knock on Wood and Come on Baby Light My Fire.
I never knew those kind of songs were called high-energy records.
The guy that helped us that mostly was Barry Evangeli, who ran a record label called Proto Records, was purely interested in the clubs. And Pete knew him, as well as a man called Nick East, and they were working in that field, in the club field.
And basically it was me, him and a secretary. I was the general manager, promo guy. The first Hazeldean record, Searching, was a huge hit in all the gay clubs.
The first club I ever sang in, a big gay club in London called Heaven, and, you know, Searching was #1 in the gay chart. That evening when I did that show, I actually, I'd been singing in a band in London, in a hotel. I went over to Heaven, and it was like, whoa! And, well, I hadn't even walked on the stage and they were going crazy, and I just fell in love with it.
About Divine, asked me to make the record, explain to me a bit more about who he was and how outrageous he could be.
Excuse me, I promised I'd be good.
We all know stories of what went on in Lust in the Dust or something, so we knew what we were taking on.
I am Divine.
They brought Divine in as this sort of middle-aged man, you know, with a bald head.
The thing is, when he's not in uniform, he's an avuncular uncle type.
So can you make a record? Because he had a huge following. So we said we'd try, but it was off the wall.
When I got into the studio to record him, because that's always my aim, I work with the singers all the time, and I was trying to make him sound like Pavarotti. I managed to get him to sing this tune quite well.
You think you're a man, but you just couldn't see. You weren't man enough to satisfy me.
We were very pleased, and Pete, I think Pete was quite pleased.
We didn't want to make a record for nobody. We worked out who we were making it for. And I suppose you could say, in some ways, that Pete, we had to please him first, but he always seems to be pleased.
We made a record, we sent Divine off to the airport with his manager, and Barry Evangeli comes in the studio and went, "You've got Divine singing." We went, "Yeah." No, I don't want him to sing. He's got to shout, that's what he does.
What have you done? He doesn't sound like Divine.
Divine had already left for the airport.
There were no mobile phones in them, by the way. So we had to put a call out, and we said, jump in a taxi, come back to the studio, we want to revocal it.
I got him back into the studio to sing it badly.
He shouted it twice and went back in the taxi and caught the plane.
It surprised us, you know, we got in the charts with it.
Shut the door. Take a look around and tell me what you find. Shut the door. Take a giant step for you and all mankind.
If I can get this on Top of the Pops, this will shock so many people.
Everybody was concerned about how he'd come across, you know, on that show, how behaved he'd be. And I went to the recording of Top of the Pops, and they were very nervous.
Did you see Top of the Pops last night? Did you see that old woman on there? I went, no, that's not a woman, that's a bloke. What? And I remember that he pulled the taxi up in Dean Street like, you know, we'd hit a wall.
The gay clubs were essential. The whole club scene was essential to breaking a record because major labels had the power, had the money to get records on the radio. The only way we could do it was to get records on the chart, so it would come on the radar of the radio stations. And when you've got all the major clubs in the UK playing your records every Friday, Saturday night, you're creating a demand for it, so when you release the record, it would go in at top 40, top 30 or top 20.
In the 60s, it was still illegal to be homosexual. So you had private clubs, which were strictly private, and you couldn't get in unless your name was on the door and they knew who you were. And I worked at one of these on a Sunday night, and it changed my life. All the records that I'd love to play, like Fontella Bass and stuff like Motor, they just adored. They danced all night. And to me, I look forward to every Sunday. I knew I could play something there, and I would instantly get a response, whether it worked or it didn't work. I guess when I went to Heaven, I was back in 64, 65, because I saw the same reaction. It was like, I can be a company that makes these records for these people.
A club DJ earns his keep by keeping the dance floor packed. If he puts music out there that nobody likes, the floor clears up and the manager says, don't come back.
When we'd made a record with what was called an acetate, which was we used to make a record made of wax, it wouldn't last very long, and you try and get your DJ to play the record, and I would go up in the cage, you know, where the DJ was, looking down on the dance floor, and I would know in about 30 seconds whether I had a hit or not. It would just stop dancing, or they would go crazy.
I'm in Proto Records one day, and who should be there? Pete Waterman. How you doing then, kid? Yeah, I'm doing fine. Searching was sitting at number 6 in the charts, and I hadn't got a follow-up. He said, you want to come down to the Marquee studio and meet these 2 guys I'm working with? I said, oh, yeah, really? He said, yeah. He said, I think you should come and meet them and listen to what we're doing.
Peter was in Barry's ear. He said, my boys are the greatest.
But I got on great with Mike and Matt because they were great. They were great musicians. They worked in dance bands as well, and they did a lot of the same sort of shows and all the kind of stuff that I was doing in various bands in London at that time, the hotel circuit and all that kind of stuff. So we had a lot in common, really.
Go, go, go.
We had a song that we'd just written for a guy. Let's put that up for consideration. So we re-demoed it in a girl's key and sent that up.
So I said, I really like this song. I said, but I don't like that chorus. It happened so quickly. And when they sent it to me, it was Whatever I Do, as we now know and love it today. Whatever I do, wherever I go. And I said, yep, that's fantastic. And I just went in more or less as quickly as we could to record it.
Hazel's a real pro. Once she got the tune in her head, she was off and running.
This was the first record where I thought they've just got everything right. They've got the sound right, the production's brilliant. Everything about that record was incredible. I just thought, these guys are in a different league to everybody else.
Hazel went to number 4. We got a silver disc for that.
We knew that dum 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 was a metronomic beat along with the drums that worked perfectly for people who wanted to dance. Right from day one, the records we were making had to be metronomic because that's what it was all about.
Our, if you could call it, plan was just write a song, put it to a dance beat, then potentially you can capture radio, club and the wider public. Pete Burns of Dead or Alive heard Whatever I Do, Wherever I Go coming out of his radio.
He said, I want to make a record like Hazel Dean.
Found out who'd produced it and made contact with Stock Aitken and Waterman to make his record.
Would I like to meet Pete Burns? Because they would like us to make a record. And I couldn't take my eyes off him. So I knew it was like, whoa, this is quite incredible.
Dead or Alive, they had a record deal with CBS. It was at the time probably the biggest record label.
Pete said to me, you know, this is a major act for us on a major label. We've got a great budget.
Pete Burns would always turn up to the studio in the full outfit, the big hair and the makeup.
And he played me 3 tracks. And then he played me Spin Me Round. And I went, that'll do.
It was that song of all their songs that they had that Pete thought we should work on first. We changed the arrangement of the structure of the song just to make it flow what we thought better.
So the whole process was very slow, very painstaking. On that particular track, a lot of the parts were already programmed, and it was a matter of putting those down with the right sound.
Matt and me didn't really need any help from the band members. We were busy trying to get the technology that we needed to realise that record.
Mike Stock told him quite rightly at one point, Pete Burns, we weren't teachers. We weren't there to teach him how the desk worked. We were there to give him hit records, which Pete took like a lead balloon.
Watch out, here I come.
Once we got the vocals on, it was great, because Pete just aced it, and I just aced it as well.
Pete Burns and possibly other members of the band didn't really understand the mixing process.
We were at loggerheads. I mean, we really were at loggerheads. I sort of said, OK, guys, off you go. All of you, at the studio.
And said to me, Phil, you're staying there.
We're going to finish this. And if you don't like it, that's it, we're over.
And Pete Waterman and I set about a long evening's mix.
At about 10:30, 11 o'clock, the desk broke down and we had to wait for the engineer to come up from Southend. So he didn't get there till 12:30.
First to hear it would have been Mike and Matt. They used to arrive at around 10 in the morning.
Played the record to Matt and Mike Mike made some comments because I got certain things wrong in the mix. Now, there's no way at this point I can rectify this. I said, for Christ's sake, don't say anything. So Pete Burns and the boys came in and I said to Phil, right, whack it up as loud as it'll go on the big speakers. I watched Pete Burns' face. It was like a child. Within 20 seconds, he's jumping up and down, they're all whooping, they're all getting excited.
I get to know your name. Well, I can trace your private number, baby. All I know is that's me. You look like you got some mind. Open up your loving arms. I want some.
First time I ever heard it in a club, it was like everybody went, what is this?
We had a lot of confidence in the record, but it just seemed that the machinery of the record company was preventing it from going to where it wanted. And in fact, it turned out that they just weren't pressing enough 12 inches. And a lot of the demand was for, we had 2 or 3 mixes. They were pressing a lot of 7 inches, but not enough 12 inches, and that was really throttling it. Once they caught up with what they should have been doing, that's when it started to really climb.
I mean, You Spin Me Round was just the perfect pop record. It was great on the radio. It was a song that you could really dance to. And I guess Stock Aitken and Waterman, that was their roots. That's what they did. They made high-energy dance music. And, of course, gave them their first ever UK #1.
I'm going, thank you very much. I can buy a house now. That's it. Mansion in the country, swimming pool. I might buy to buy 2 mansions.
We sort of rubbed our hands, thought, yeah, there we are, we've made it. And nobody called us. Nobody rang up. Phone stopped ringing, really.
One of the things that was apparent at the time was that Pete was financially in a hole. And he had done some amazing ducking and diving. And I said to Pete, look, you're in difficulty financially. I'm very happy to give you my money that I've just made. And in return, he gave me a piece of the company. And then he said, well, why don't you just run PWO?
I was saying to Pete, we should get our own studio. That's been my maxim throughout life. Do it yourself. Do everything yourself.
It seemed to be Mike driving it.
So at the beginning of '85, we came out of the Marquee and moved into our own studio.
You went down this cul-de-sac of what looked like Victorian warehouses.
The Vineyard, being an old power station, had very thick walls, so it had some acoustic properties.
You came across this brick building with these steel doors. But the way this place worked was, by the time you went up the staircase and into the studio, people were very relaxed. It was just a great atmosphere to be in.
We brought with us our team. Phil Harding came with us.
I could feel that this team was going somewhere.
There was a camaraderie there that was built up, which was part of our strength, I think. We were all pulling together.
We scrabbled around because, as I said, the phone wasn't going.
We were sitting at #1 and thinking, well, we're in our new studio here. What are we going to do?
I mean, we've got to make a living. We've got bills to pay.
We took on a band called Brilliant. The lady they got to do the backing vocals on that was called Princess, which was called Desiree Heslop, stage name Princess, and I thought, that's a good voice.
They called me for the session, I came to it, they liked how I sounded, and that's how I started to get to know people.
We wrote 2 songs that afternoon, and there was one track called Save Your Love for Your #1. And I changed that to Say I'm Your #1, and as soon as I said that, Mike nearly fell off his chair.
Come the evening, I asked Desiree if she would stay behind and sing Say I'm Your #1.
I said, I've got to do this. I can get paid for doing what I love.
It's a song which couldn't be more different from You Spin Me Round.
The original demo was kind of a Billie Jean feel. Not exactly like that, but more of a mid-tempo thing. It was Mike's brainwave to turn it into more of a Jam and Lewis thing after he'd heard Desiree Princess singing.
So I would do any little thing that, you know, stay, anything little thing that came to me, and they would be like, yeah, we'll keep that. And I was part of it all, you know? It was my baby too.
Pete was on holiday. I finished the record, mixed it with Phil Harding, and stuck a cassette on Pete's desk for when he came back, see what he thought of it. Because at the time we was searching around what to do, so I'd sort of taken a venture out, as it were, with an unknown girl singing an unknown song. And when Pete came back off holiday, he heard it, and I could hear the commotion in the office. He was whooping everywhere, and he loved it.
I remember hearing the name Princess. I said, you can't call her Princess.
You said princess? It's a dog's name.
We've got a prince. You can't have a prince and princess.
Look how many times you've said it. And he said, all right, I'm princess, all right then. So then he warmed to it.
She was amazing.
I did pour emotion into it. And no matter what, people feel that. If you're feeling it, they invariably do. It had that dust on it.
Pete said, look, I've just got this studio in South London. I'll give you a desk, set a label up, set Supreme up. Pete played me Sam #1. He said, look, I've tried to place this with the major publishers and they've turned it down. I think it's a hit.
And then finally, when it's released, you know, we broke into the top 10 again.
Loved you. Say I'm your number one, 'cause you know I'd be good to you. Say I'm your number one, won't you?
She was almost perfect artist. Incredible voice, very articulate, very good at doing interviews. She had a really unique image. She really stood out.
Well, we did an album with Princess. We did several other sort of R&B-ish tracks around that time.
It was so organic. It was so natural. It was so... We were so cool with each other. Everybody was fine. We had... It was a love affair.
No matter what they do, I'm gonna keep on loving you. No matter what they say, they'll never make me walk away. This far down the line, it's still an easy thing to say. I'll keep on loving you.
We were family. Really were like family.
And we had a lot of success with Princess, and she was offered a big deal from Polydor, which we couldn't compete with, and she signed with Polydor.
We could have gone on for a long time, I think. There were other things. They were also dealing with other artists now, and the kind of attention that I would have required to present the next stage of Princess wasn't immediately available.
Bananarama came to us because Siobhan came up with this idea of doing Venus.
What, the old Shocking Blue Venus?
So Venus was done because Bananarama had heard Dead or Alive.
I remember sitting with Matt and Mike saying, what the hell are we going to do with this?
Well, at first we were pretty trepidatious because, you know, they'd had lots of hits. We'd seen them on Top of the Pops. They were the first sort of real established act we'd worked with.
I think Matt felt, as I did, that you know, that's a bit of extra pressure. We kind of liked it when we worked with artists for the first time who'd never had hits, new to the industry, because that's like a blank canvas, and we could be experimental as well as creative as we liked. So I recorded the vocals for that, They get behind the mic and they knew the song backwards. I mean, a couple of hours, I've got it down. I don't need any more. It's fine. I couldn't find anything wrong with it. It's all basically unison. There's no really harmonies or anything going on. So I said to them, that's it, girls, we got it. And they said, no, you can't have got it. It takes us 3 days to do vocals. I said, why does it take you 3 days to do vocals? Well, previous producers always took that long to have it. I said, well, look, I said, as far as I'm concerned, you've come in, you've done it. It's all fine. Leave it with me. Venus, as a song, had a boogie bass line. And I said to Pete and Matt, look, this song will lose something unless you keep that bass line. It's integral to the feel of it, but we'll brighten it up, we'll chivvy it along, and we'll make it sound dancey.
We played the girls the mix, or the tentative mix, and I said, you know, so girls, what do you think? Not a word. So I said, well, you must think something. Well, it don't sound like Spin Me Round, does it? What? Well, you didn't say you wanted it to sound like Spin Me Round. Well, what do you think we came to you for?
We came back to the studio and we just put a bit more, turned the percussion up a bit.
And we got all the Dead or Alive tapes out the studio, and we took all the percussion off Dead or Alive, Spin Me Round, and put it all on Venus. We come back and they went, yeah, that's it. And we went,
She's got it. Yeah, baby, she's got it. I'm your Venus. I'm your fire, your desire. Well, I'm your Venus. I'm your fire, your desire.
The record has guitar on it. Guitars were a no-no on dance, high energy, Northern Soul, Boys Town records. You didn't have guitars, you know. But that song coming from the 60s featured guitars. And so we, rather than just play the guitar, got Matt to play the B. It's a B sus. Then we put it into the sampling machine and sampled it so it made it sound more electronic. Do that well in the UK, you know, it only got to, was it number 8 or something? But in the States, this flew out the door, went to number 1.
Venus became a worldwide number 1. To most people, it was the follow-up to Spin Me Round, because Pete had not wanted to do another high-energy record, so what Pete didn't do, Bananarama did. Well, the turning point, without a question, was Mel and Kim. We knew we got it right with Mel and Kim. They gave us the confidence that we needed.
And Mel was in the club and the producer walked up to her and said to her, you're beautiful, what do you do? And she said, really, I want to be a singer. And he said to her, that's fantastic. I'm looking for a singer. He said, but I'm looking for 2 girls. Do you have anyone else you can sing with? And she said, yeah, my sister. And he was like, does she look like you? And she was like, everyone thinks we're twins. And then from there, we started to do demos.
Mel and Kim had a manager, and he wanted them to work with some other producer. And I said, no, we work with Aitken and Waterman.
And Mel and I were really excited because, you know, they had produced and written this track for Princess. We just were convinced it was 3 brothers. It was 3 black guys that had done that. And down they came. And I imagine our faces was a picture.
She couldn't believe that, as it were, 2 white guys sitting in the studio to come up with this R&B, American-sounding song or record.
And they just appeared so old, really kind of not funky, not groovy, and...
But once they started working together, they just fell in love with them.
Mel and Kim were a little neutron bomb, really. You know, they were wildly enthusiastic about working in a studio, wildly enthusiastic about working with us.
Because of Princess doing this R&B soul thing, Nick had come to us and said perhaps they could go down a similar route. And we recorded, or we'd written a song called System. Which was a bit R&B. Put them behind the microphone and they couldn't sing with headphones on.
It freaked us out hearing our voices come back because we were used to just singing one-on-one to each other. We spent the day singing that, and they were really happy. They said, look, we'd go to the pub after, you want to come to the pub? And we were like, yeah, okay. So there was this lovely little pub that eventually became our hangout.
A couple of bottles of lager and they were away. They were, fun. We were falling off the chairs, all of us.
I just think they'd never met girls like, because we were kind of, we were streetwise, we were tough, but we were also very feminine at the same time, so.
I turned to Mike and went, got it. These girls now become our rebels.
Pete said, scrap the track. We need something tough, something edgy for these girls.
One of the things that Pete recognised, and probably Matt and Mike did, was that if you take somebody completely raw and unknown, then they've got a chance to mould that and make that into something the way they see it. And they were really confident about their own opinion, which you have to be as a record producer. You can't sit there going, well, what does everyone else think?
Working class girls who'd had it rough all their life, and that would give every young girl in Great Britain something to look forward to.
And we went back in the studio, and up on the monitor was showing out Get Fresh at the Weekend in brackets. And I remember Mel and I going, what's showing out? What does that even mean?
I mean, you've got to imagine, these three guys who were so unlikely producing and writing a song called Showing Out and coming up with a lyric like that, which they know nothing about. And it was such a genius lyric and such a genius song. It was just, everything was just so unlikely.
So showing out is just showing off, which is what they're doing all the time. They were laughing and giggling. And we recorded on the records, you can hear giggles and laughs. We incorporated it in it because it felt real to do that.
Because we were used to the cans now, we went into the vocal booth and we just sang together. And once they mixed it, which we got on vinyl by Tova, and we had the 12-inch, it was a killer track. It's still my favourite Mel and Kim track.
They were sassy enough to carry it off, and it was absolutely perfect.
The dance routine we learnt in my living room in London Fields. So we'd stand in my living room and it was all right. Okay, and then you turn, okay. And it was all done at home.
We charted it somewhere in the 30s, and then we got a Radio 1 playlist, and then we got Top of the Pops. Yeah, top 5.
They were the first new artists that Stock Aitken and Waterman worked with from scratch.
Working with those two girls on what we wanted to do, we became a group. 3 boys and 2 girls.
Showing Out got to number 3. We thought it was going to do number 1 because it was different enough, and it didn't, and I think that was a bit of a disappointment. And I think we just wanted to make a more poppy record, and Respectable was it.
Respectable, for God's sake.
I think we knew we had a winner then at that, but once we got the vocals down, and the girls just sang it brilliantly. It was as if it was, as much their composition as ours.
When we're singing the track, it's just very straight. None of the effects are there then, so there's no take, so it's just take or leave us, and then later all the magic happened.
We're always looking for new sounds, new ideas, new ways to use technology, and looking for new technology. And this thing called a Poublisson, French sampling machine, came to our attention.
Which meant you could play the vocals back at various pitches. It's the start of the chorus, take or leave us. So it goes, tay, 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 da 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 tay, tay.
Nick East hated it.
I was worried it was a little bit too commercial, and the tay, tay, tays worried me. So I rang Pete and said, I love it, but can you take out the tay, tay, tays?
And I said to Mike, stop, they don't like... They can't take it off. What? Can't take it off. Take that off, I'm out of here. And I've never heard him say that before, ever. We have the right to stand our ground, and I'm telling you that is important.
The one thing I'd say about Pete was that he never once would criticise or in any sense denigrate our songs or the songs or the records that we made.
That night, I flew to Amsterdam with Mel and Kim, and they were doing a big TV show there.
And it used to be a show called Countdown, and it was huge. It was their Top of the Pops.
What did you think of that, Bruce Willis?
I think he's lovely. Yeah, he's gorgeous.
Oh, really, huh?
It was the first airing of Respectable, and like Top of the Pops, you do 2, 3, 4, sometimes 5 takes. And by the end of the second take, the whole studio was singing Take, Take, Take.
I'm like, OK, I got that wrong, that works. So I rang Pete.
For Christ's sake, don't take that take off the start. We got a club video got showed on Saturday morning television. It was all over. It was Mel and Kim wall to wall.
They were your girls next door.
In the 80s, there was a lot of depression. People were broke, a lot of people on the dole. And then Mel and Kim came along.
They were like a breath of fresh air.
Just really fun, colourful, bright, young, inspirational. It was phenomenal. I mean, it sold something like, about 750,000 copies in the UK.
We were like a little team, and we lived in a little bubble. So we would regularly go to clubs with Mel and Kim. We hung out with Mel and Kim.
It was good times.
And Mel's favourite saying was FLM. You'd ask her, how is it, FLM? Is that all right, FLM? What do you think, FLM?
You know, we was always walking around the studio going, yeah, lovely, mate. Lovely, mate.
That was lovely, mate.
I remember we recorded it, and Mike said, well, we can't call it FLM, for God's sake. Fun, love and money.
If you're in confusion, here's the solution. Fun, love, and money. You can't get the answers if you don't take chances. Fun, love, and money.
We always recorded all the laughter and all the chat between Mel and Kim in the studio. It's all on tape because they were funny. The pair of them were funny. And it made the records very different from anybody else.
They'd just get us to talk to each other with no track. Mike would just throw questions at us and say, you got a boyfriend? And, you know, Mel might say, boyfriend? Boyfriends are boring. And then he kept it.
Those songs sound exactly like the way Mel and Kim were. That's them. It's a snapshot.
That album was written around our personalities. And for me, that's why I think our tracks have a slightly different vibe to them.
I thought we were onto a real winner here. Kind of the wind was taken out of our sails. We heard that Mel wasn't very well.
Mel had been kind of complaining about back problems. She kept saying that her lower back was giving her pain, and we just put it down to we were heavily kind of being choreographed at that time. The whole thing was routines, and it was a hectic schedule. We'd gone to Japan, which was a nightmare because it was like something 16-hour flight, and she was in absolute agony. And by the time we got there, all the promo they had set up, we couldn't do nothing. And by this time, I was thinking, okay, something's not right here. And eventually we flew back. She went to Bart's for tests, and then it came back saying that she had cancer.
I can't tell you.
And obviously for Kim, her sister, her baby sister, is so ill.
We had FLM out, and there was absolutely no promo going on for it. And I was adamant that I wasn't going to do it, and I didn't. Because I was there looking after my sister, and it was very important for me that we went through this together.
They gave her chemo, and and she put on a huge amount of weight. Obviously, lost all her hair.
And Mel was adamant that she didn't want anyone to know.
Because we were palming them off, saying that she had hurt her back in dancing, and that worked for about, I don't know, 6 months.
After a while, the press got suspicious. So it turns out that a reporter had shown up at her house and told her that she was from the hospital and she was a nurse. That's how low the press is.
Then it all came out.
Yeah, it was a very hard time.
We were talking 1.5 years of just hospitals. She had had all her chemo, and her hair was starting to grow back. She was slowly coming back to Mel, and she said, you know what would be great, mate, is if we were back in the studio.
We obviously banned everybody from the studio that night.
We didn't think she wanted people around, but she did.
She said, "Where are all the boys?" We said, "Well, we didn't think you wanted to sing. Get them all back."
She was bandaged up, got protective around her spine, and we had to sit her down on a stool behind the microphone to sing. It was very, very, very difficult. Very difficult.
They were great with her, and it was like the old days. It was like being back again.
She'd have died in the studio if we'd let her.
And the plan was I went in first to do a guide vocal. And he'd given us this song, and I wasn't feeling it. It just wasn't working. And then Mike disappeared and came back with That's the Way It Is. And again, written about our situation.
That's the way it is. Every number one. That's just the way it is. Every number one.
That's the way it is. And I thought, that was it. It did sum it up. There's nothing we could do. That was it. It was the way it is, and you can't get around it.
Looking back, we must have been very fresh at the time. We didn't think it because we were just being us.
I believe that if we'd got round to the second album, I think those girls could have taken the world, and I think they could have been Madonna or Jackson.
It was a great time. We left our mark. People still care, which is incredible. And, metal lives on in the music.
When I first met Pete, it was, without question, a defining moment for me, my life, my career. I had just started a tiny little record label. I had an artist. I heard a record they'd made by Hazel Dean, and I loved this record. And I wanted to know who produced it, and I tracked them down to this place in the borough. And I came in thinking I was doing them a favor because I had a record I was just about to release. So he puts the record on, plays it for 20 seconds, goes, "That's a hit, mate."
We had a massive hit with So Macho.
It sold about 1 million copies.
But then that left us with a problem because we needed another song and we only had one song.
He turned around to me and he went, "What are you doing here?" And I went, "I want you to give me a record for my artist." And he went, "I'm too busy." And I went, "Doing what?" And he just gave me this awful wink. Like, "Watch." I said, "I have no idea what you're talking about." And then it just went boom. Singles in those days, you had a number 1, number 2 single just in the UK. You're talking about million and a half copies, physical copies sold just in the UK. Then you got the rest of the world. There was a lot of money sloshing around.
Stock Aitken and Waterman were forever being sniped at by the music press.
The cool music press would go, "Oh, it's another Stock Aitken and Waterman manufactured bit of cheese,"
suggesting that what we did was easy or rubbish.
Radio didn't like what Stock Aitken and Waterman were making. They hated their records.
Let's get that very plain. We were hated.
They were really unhappy that without radio, Pete and Mike and Matt kept having all these hits.
You got 3 lads that took on the world and made a fortune. We were David. We had a catapult. We didn't have artillery.
Some of the stuff we did, it was straight bubblegum, but the vast majority wasn't. It might sound simple, but there's a lot of artistry involved in making it sound simple.
There was a snobbery towards them, of course,
the second you become so successful, there's a backlash.
I think it was the fact that they were occupying the top 10 every other week.
But at the end of the day, you can't deny how brilliant these guys were.
We went to the Royal Albert Hall to collect an award, and the bunch of DJs with funny hats and whistles pelted us. They threw cans of beer and cans of piss and anything else at us. And I got there with a can of something that smelled horrible. That's why Pete wanted to do Roadblock the way that he did it, to get back at the DJs.
Mike went off and recorded this bass and drum pattern with a chord thing on it and presented that to me.
So I put a drum loop down, I put a bass line onto it that was a bit weird.
I was driving home and Gary Crowley was on the radio. He was saying, get down there, it's going to be a roadblock.
What a great title. We'll have that for this song. We'll call it Roadblock. We got Lucy, Nicky and all the girls from the office, got Pete in, got the tape ups, and we all went behind the mic and sang, Roadblock, Roadblock.
We put a load of crowd noises on it, made it into a party record, basically.
They didn't tell people who it was because they didn't want their name to put people off playing it.
And all the cool radio DJs were playing that, you know, like, so happy to have some decent music to play instead of that stock Aitken Waterman rubbish.
A particular magazine would always reviewing Bananarama singles. And the only reason they wanted to review them is so they could slate them. But they were the first to review Roadblock, not knowing it was us. And they said that's the best goddamn dance record of 1987.
It was a bit of a spoof, but I think it got to 13. And all the tracks we made, I probably hear that most often these days.
When we all found out that actually Roadblock was Stock Aitken and Waterman, I went, fair dues, fair dues. It's a really good track.
I had a story in the newspaper because the boy who'd starred in one of my music videos, I'd started to date him. So the newspapers were saying, oh, Sunita has a toy boy.
I got this phone call saying, I've got your hit, mate. And I went, which one? He went, your hit for Sunita. So I got in my car, drove down to the studio, and he played me the bridge, actually, of the song. And it was enough to go, right, I've got to get her in the studio as quickly as possible.
I remember thinking that I was going to be treated like a star because I'd had a hit. And I got there, and to my horror, Mike Stock is on the piano, and the first thing he does is stop playing scales and hitting notes and saying, sing this note. And I was like, it's okay, I'm already warmed up. I was singing in the car on the way to get here. No, I just want to see if you can sing in tune or not. And I remember thinking, right, this is going to be interesting.
The biggest anomaly of all of the way that we worked is that Mike and I, we'd never met the artists that we were going to work with until the moment the studio door opened. Most producers will go out to dinner, you know, there'll be a lot of schmoozing and getting to know you. It's all going to be fine, isn't it going to be great? We're really looking forward. With us, it was just very cold and bang.
Sing the line about, you know, you want everyone to know. Okay, I sing that. And he said, okay, good, well done. That's the quickest we've ever recorded a track. And I said, well, we haven't sung it yet. Like you had to do one perfect take in the old days. But they sort of, a line here, a line there, a line, and then they kind of just put it all together. I'm now Whitney Houston.
Pete had this amazing knack of finding somebody who would not necessarily look like a star, but they had a good voice. He could see the way that he would be able to successfully bring them to market.
The first time I was in the presence of Pete Waterman, let's say, he'd come up to see a showcase that our then managers had put together.
Then came the third group. They were called FBI.
I started as the drummer in that band, and then I kind of progressed into being the singer.
I couldn't take my eyes off him.
A former girlfriend of Pete Waterman's, she'd seen him, and she said to me, his voice gave her got her all wobbly. I'm just trying to put it in a better way than that. I don't know what to say, really.
I'll take that kid. I'll sign him as an artist.
I remember he had red leather trousers, and we all knew that he had a Jag as well because the Jag was outside. And we're all thinking, red leather trousers, Jag, music business. This is the way to go.
We've got him a youth opportunity training program, a YOP. And he's going to get 20 quid a week. We have to pay him 20 quid a week.
I ended up being a T-boy at Stock Aitken Waterman's place, but it was amazing. It was like a really great apprenticeship.
And that's what he did. He came down and served us tea and sandwiches for a good year, I think, before we actually worked with him.
There is only me who makes decent tea down here, so somebody's got to do it, you know.
He was the singer and an artist that Pete wanted to develop, but the rest of the building weren't told that.
And he stayed with me in Crouch End in my flat, so we became sort of flatmates.
And I used to go into the studio every single day with him in the morning. Like, we'd get up, we'd have a cup of tea, we'd jump in the car, and off we'd go. And he'd had a huge, massive, big 80s phone. He'd be screaming and shouting at people. I don't think I ever saw Pete where he wasn't on it. I don't think I ever saw him where he was just chilled. He was always chasing the dream.
Rick was around Bananarama and Dead or Alive. He just was part of the team.
So I was setting the desk in the morning, preparing for them to make You Spin Me Round, or, you know, Respectable. I played table tennis with those guys. When I think about that, there's so many things about their building and their setup that I had no reference. So I just thought, well, it's normal. But it obviously was not normal. It was not normal in any way, shape or form.
You've got to understand we had a great staff. And our staff were family. So Rick was family.
There was also the side of it where they went to the pub every night, and I mean every night. They were going to talk shop, they were going to talk business, they were going to talk about the records and probably talk about the artists. I was kind of allowed to sit with them.
And it was only some months later when Pete said, actually, Rick's here to develop as an artist and as a writer. And we started helping Rick and working with him.
He has a baritone, but when he reaches the high notes, it's committed and full and accurate. And I thought, we need to make a song that will show that voice off.
Peter had come up with this title, Never Gonna Give You Up, just to get the starting point. We were just shouting lines to each other, and after about 5 minutes of that, Mike says, great, I've got that, fantastic. And then we sat down and wrote the verses.
When you're laying a master down on anybody's vocal, you're putting something down that's never been put down before, and sometimes you've got to do it note by note.
Mike was pretty tough, I think, in terms of getting you to do the vocals the way he wanted them.
We're no strangers to love. You know the rules, and so do I.
And he had a certain thing in the way that he wanted the vocals to be, and all good producers do, and I've come to realise that. But as a 21-year-old, 20-year-old kid, I thought he was a bit of a tough nut, to be honest, but he kind of had to be. I was very inexperienced, I didn't really know what I was doing.
Peter came in and said, and by the way, how's that Rick Astley track going? And we said, well, we seem to have hit a brick wall. And the reason it wasn't working was that Rick's voice was dragging the track back, because it's so big and so all-encompassing and so powerful that there was no funk in it, there was no rhythm, there was no groove. We found a track that was out at the time, that was a sort of house music track, that just happened to be in the same key as well, weirdly. And we basically grafted that rhythm track onto what we had, and suddenly it worked. And it was just like, wow, where did that come from?
Never gonna give you up, never gonna let you down, never gonna run around and desert you.
I mean, it's so difficult for me to talk about that song because it's literally part of my DNA.
Never gonna tell a lie and hurt you.
That record is the absolute turning point of everything in my life, and so I'm pretty emotional about it even today. I'm still unbelievably grateful for it.
When people saw Rick for the first time, they were shocked.
I think people thought he could be a black American singer.
All the cabbie drivers in London said, "Did you see that guy last night? I thought it was Luther Vandross."
I'd have to say most of my favourite singers were American black guys. And without them knowing it, they taught me to sing.
Most people thought it was someone else singing and it wasn't really him.
One of the morning shows, they sort of thought they'd catch Rick out. So they rang Rick in a hotel in Glasgow and asked him to sing on the radio live. That wasn't a problem for Rick. Radio 1 just took off. Because once he'd done that, every DJ on Radio 1 all day was talking about it, and for days saying, "Did you hear this kid? He's unbelievable."
I played this song, and I think I played it again. It was so good. It is just the perfect pop song.
Once these things are released, we're on to the next things. We're not paying much attention until suddenly I find out he's on top of the pops.
Bit closer, three, can you?
And suddenly we're number one. And we're number one in France and Germany. And all of Europe, 25 countries, we're number one. Some records you can't stop, you know.
It's one of those melodies that puts you in a time and a place and reminds you of where you were, and it defines a moment in time.
Kylie Minogue was a name that neither Matt nor I had heard, and Neighbours was just before the 1 o'clock news on the BBC.
How would you like to come in and try singing in a proper studio to see just what you can do? I mean, we're always on the lookout for new talent, and thanks to Scott here, we might just have struck gold with you.
Me? You want me?
That's right.
I could be a singer.
It's great.
I don't believe it.
In Australia, Mushroom was a company owned by Michael Gazinski, who was a promoter. And so he was doing the tours and the big gigs. Pete had done a thing where he seconded Mike Duffy, one of our engineers, to go down to Australia.
We sent Mike down on a sabbatical for 6 months to teach these guys how to use the equipment.
One of the first things Michael did was to give Kylie to Mike and say, make a record with her. And they chose The Locomotion.
Became the biggest selling single of the decade in Australia.
I got Mike on the phone. He always calls me boss. Boss, I've got a hit. I'm number one in Australia. Oh, yeah? Yeah, I've sold 100,000 records.
The next logical step, with Neighbours being a big success in the UK, was to go to the mothership, the homeland of where Mike Duffy came from, and go to Stockhead Waterman.
Would you do the next Kylie single for me? I say, yeah, of course, no problem. The next time she's in London, pop around the studio. Now, what I can't say to him is I've got 6 records in the top 10 and I've got artists queuing out the door. We don't have time.
I got a phone call from Pete. He said, have you heard of this TV show called Neighbours? And I went, yes. He said, do you know who Kylie Minogue is? I went, no. He said, well, she's the star of Neighbours. And he said, I have a deal with Mushroom Records. They want me to sign Kylie Minogue. Will you sign her? And I went, yes, if you make the record. He went, no. I said, well, then I'm not signing her. For about 5 years, I felt physically sick every time I heard one of her records, thinking, God, if she'd been signed to me, my label would have gone insane.
So we arranged for Kylie to come over for a week, and she would be in the studio with Matt and Mike, and we would make a record, and then she would go back into the show.
Neighbours was a grueling soap opera schedule, so in order to have time to get to London, The scriptwriters would have to write me out of the storyline. This was my first international trip, and I was, 19 years old or something.
I speak with Pete and say, Kylie is here. How can we get her into the studio? What's the time? He says, well, the guys are working on some other things. They need to finish. Give us a day or two, and we'll come up with something.
David Howes, who was waiting for Pete to tell him she could go to the studio, took her out for every museum. She took him to Windsor, took her everywhere he could, took her shopping.
The days rolled on, and we'd ask each day, and each day we would hear they're not ready.
On the final day she was in the country, she was going back that afternoon to Melbourne, 4 o'clock plane out of Heathrow.
There was an unwritten rule that David Howes would not go into the studio.
I'm not directly communicating with Matt and Mike. I'm communicating with Pete. Pete communicates with Matt and Mike.
We don't have any more days. We've got to get this done and get back to Melbourne.
So I broke the unwritten rule of don't talk to Matt and Mike in the studio.
David comes to me and said, well, Kylie's in reception now. I said, who? Kylie? Who's Kylie? Kylie Minogue. So I get on the phone, I call Pete, he's in Manchester. Pete, do you know Kylie Minogue? Oh, forgot to tell you. Oh, shit.
You have to tell her to go because we don't have time. But Mike, being the gent he is, said, we've got to make time. She's here and she's flying back this afternoon.
We had 2 or 3 tracks that were lying around. We had certainly one for Banana Armour that hadn't been finished and hadn't made it to the album. I said, why don't we just tickle one of these up? And Mike said, no, we've got to write something from scratch. So we did very quickly.
Because David Howes had told me all about her, everything in her life seemed wonderful. Why does she want to become a pop star? She's got everything she needs. She's a famous actress. She's doing it all out there. Why does she want to work with us? I thought, perhaps she hasn't got love. She's got everything else, but she really wants love and she's got it. I should be so lucky in love. And the song is a sad song. The sad, it's all in my imagination.
I really didn't know what to expect. I'd only been in a couple of studios prior to that.
I got the first verse done and said to Matt, go over there, write a second verse, follow the meter.
So they presented the song, I Should Be So Lucky, talked me through it, played it to me, this is how it goes.
And she was quick. And she was learning the words as we were feeding them to her, so she could project it to the mic. She was good at that because she learned a neighbour's script every day.
I'm sure I sang it line by line to make sure we had everything before I left again. I do remember thinking, this is really high. This is a very high song to sing.
I said to myself, I better listen to this record.
Pete wasn't terribly interested in this record. And then I had an amazing phone call one day from Michael Hurl, the BBC producer, who is in Australia.
I hear you've recorded Kylie Minogue. I said, yes.
I've seen this girl. I'm down here. She's fantastic. I'd like to do something with her.
For the Christmas morning with Noel Edmonds, which had the record Christmas viewing on.
Flying around Sydney doing this video, which I remember being embarrassed of for years, and now I absolutely love it. It's so amazing.
Suddenly, before you know it, we've got a #1 record and a major new star.
Woolworths have come in for 200,000. And for the first time, we saw hands-on how much money was generated by an artist and a record company.
Suddenly, we are making millions and millions of pounds. We're selling millions of records. And I think that was the downfall, because then the accountants need to take over.
Welcome to the Hit Factory in London.
He was like a box of fireworks,
When Pete heard the record, he went ka-ching.
We're #1 for 5 weeks, and somebody says, what's the follow-up?
They still worked at an incredible pace.
Singers like that just come in and do the job.
The next thing you knew, I'm on top of the pops, #1.
It could get testy at times.
Matt decided that he'd had enough.
And I thought, well, fine, if that's the way you feel, fine, screw you.
It wasn't the same.
So we've learned how the Hit Factory was built. Next, the artist that rolled off the pop production line. Smashes from Rick Astley, Kylie Minogue, Mel and Kim, Jason Donovan, and many more. Greatest hits in just